Welcome Dr. Sinha, Manish, and Steve to this last session of the day. We will have a very different panel here. What we do is that let Dr. Sinha present for 7, 8, 10 minutes first. Then we get Steve Allanson to present his view on S&OP and IBP based planning in FMCG. And then we'll have Manish talk about the new age IBP. If I'm not very controversial to use that word, Manish, right? And then we'll have a question answer session. So I think to facilitate the flow of thought process, I don't want to say anything. I will start first with Dr. Sinha, who would bring you a DDMRP perspective from the Indian firm, Godrej Consumer Products, which will generalize it to some extent because he's no more with Godrej. And then we'll have Steve, who talks about planning a demand plan and demand planning in FMCG. From his perspective, he would build upon his own way and he will come in, and then the money. So we start with you, Dr. Sinha. See to it that we keep to maximum 7 to 8 minutes, so we have some question answer sessions also.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Dr. Singh. Just before I start, there are two caveats. Firstly, I won't talk about COVID. Secondly, I will give a practitioner's view, not a theoretical view. I'll give a view of what really works in industry, at least in India and some of the other countries where we have implemented it. Now, before we discuss any part of demand planning is a part of the overall demand management process, and we should keep that in mind. If you look at a demand management process, there are 3 pillars of that. The first part is the demand estimation and demand shaping. If you estimate the demand in our S&OP or IBP process of how the products are expected to sell in the near future over the next few months, I'm sure none of the management would be happy with the way things are going. We would like to shape the demand. And in S&OP and IBP, we typically discuss the demand shaping activities. What should we do to up the demand level? What type of activities, the marketing activities, consumer promotions, sales promotions are required to take the demand to a higher level for a specific product in a specific geography for a specific time period. So these demand shaping activities are really the ones which come out of S&OP and IBP process, which is extremely important, even in a DDMRP context. Now, this demand shaping activities lead to a demand estimate. This is still an inside out process. Now let me come to the last pillar. I am skipping the second pillar, I'll come to it later. The last pillar is the demand fulfillment. The first is demand estimation and demand shaping, and the last is demand fulfillment. Many companies use this demand estimate for demand fulfillment, and that's a clear recipe for disaster, because these estimates are at a very aggregate level. They are at a monthly level. They have been done too much in advance. So if you use this estimate directly for demand fulfillment, there would be issues of both stockouts and excess inventory. I'll just give you a simple example. If you have planned a demand shaping activity, which is expected to give a blip of say 30% in demand in whichever region or whichever product you are planning. In real life, you won't get a 30% blip everywhere. There would be certain regions, certain geographies where you may get only a 7 to 8% blip. And there could be certain geographies where you could get 70 to 80% blip. Now, if you have used this 30% blip estimate to allocate stocks to different areas, you will surely run out of stocks in certain places where you see 70-80% blip, and you will be staring at excess inventory wherever the blip is only 7 to 8%. And this is going to be the reality. Whatever you may plan, the reality will be different. Now, that's where we come to the second pillar of demand management, which is demand sensing. The moment you start running this promo in the market will respond differently. Now it's a question of how fast can you pick up the trend and how fast can you respond. So if the market is giving you only a 7-8% blip, there will be very early indications that the promo is not doing well in that market. And all of us have seen that in our experience. And if it's giving a very high blip, again, there will be very early signals. Now these signals are outside in signals. And these outside in signals should really be used for dynamic allocation of stocks. So we have a concept of this near-term demand forecasting. So compared to the S&OP and IBP demand forecast, which is at a monthly level, aggregate level, consensus, which is used largely for medium-term supply chain actions like capacity planning, major input materials planning, and demand shaping activities. Against that, we have the concept of a near-term forecasting, where you forecast at a much more granular level over the next, say, 5 days or 7 days or 10 days. You really need a forecast beyond that for supply actions. And these are the forecasts which are used for day-to-day supply actions. What should we dispatch from one node to another? What should be produced today? And what raw material should be ordered today? And this is so granular that we are talking of millions of combinations being forecast and refreshed on a daily basis. So it is on autopilot mode using AI and ML techniques. It can't be done manually through a demand planning process, but it has to be in autopilot mode. And this is what should feed into the daily supply chain actions. The problem is that we are talking of two types of forecasts, and people quite frequently interchange these two. We need a two-pronged approach to demand planning. There are two different uses, there are two different horizons or ranges for which these are meant. Knives and swords, both are meant for cutting, but you can't use a sword for cutting onions. So it's the same way. You can't use an S&OP and IBP demand forecast to run your day-to-day supply chain actions. That will be a disaster. For day-to-day supply chain actions, you need demand sensing on an ongoing basis. If you use a wrong approach for the wrong action in the wrong range, then there would be issues. So in the ideal scenario, the way it should work is S&OP IBP is extremely important for medium-term action, and these are largely used for demand shaping. Demand sensing is used for short-term supply chain actions, but what is critical is there has to be a fast feedback loop. We can't depend on a monthly feedback to what has been estimated in S&OP. There has to be a fast feedback loop on a daily basis as to whether the demand shaping activities are doing their job or they are underperforming or overperforming. And the moment we build this fast feedback loop, the daily demand sensing has to feed into the S&OP IBP process. So if certain medium-term decisions have been taken, for example, if you are getting a 70% blip against 30%, you should have a relook at the capacity plan, which was done based on the S&OP and IBP forecast. You should have a relook at availability of critical materials, about the vendors' capacity, the need for alternate vendors. All the medium-term actions must be revisited based on the fast feedback loop of demand sensing. And the moment we have these three pillars of demand shaping, demand sensing, and demand fulfillment, and actively talking to each other and giving feedback and feeding on each other, then you would have a demand planning process which meshes the actual fulfillment action in line with what has been planned. And in case of any deviation, the fast feedback loop ensures that we act on time. So those are some of the thoughts that I thought I could put forward, and obviously we'll have many more views, and we can take the questions at the end. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Sinha. Let me move on to Steve Allanson. Steve, what are your comments on S&OP and IBP as a planning tool? I wouldn't go into monthly and daily, but what are your views? And lastly, for the FMCGs.
Hi, hope everybody can hear me. I mean, yes, I want to talk about. Yeah, fantastic.
Could be a little louder.
So I want to talk about S&OP and IBP, and in particular, I want to talk about demand planning in the context of particularly FMCG. And I want to talk briefly about why demand planning is essential, both long-term demand planning for strategic reasons, medium-term demand planning, as Dr. Sinha has said, in terms of managing the S&OP process, managing capacity, etc., but also short-term demand planning, and why all of these right across this horizon is essential, even in a DDMRP environment. One of the reasons why I've come to these conclusions is really because of my background. So I've spent my whole life in the FMCG environment. And the UK and Europe in this context are a little bit different from a lot of the rest of the world. So I was recently in Canada, and I was quite surprised to learn that their typical customer order lead time for retail was day 1 for day 7, day 8, or even day 10. Here in the UK, more typical is day 1 for day 1 or day 1 for day 2. Day 1 for day 3 delivery is extremely rare these days, and beyond that, almost unheard of. So when the supermarkets are ordering from you these days, they either want delivery the same day as you receive the order or the next day. Now, when you couple that with a typical FMCG manufacturer who may have 800, 1,000, or even 2,000 SKUs to manufacture, you simply cannot cycle through all of those products in a day or 2 days. Most common is you cycle through your products in a week, although some manufacturers can still only manage to cycle through their products in 2 weeks or a month in the worst case. Now, in this case, what you have is that you have orders coming in for delivery tomorrow when you may not be able to remanufacture that product for a week, 2 weeks, or 3 weeks. You absolutely must lay down stock, predicting what stock you need to lay down for the orders you're going to receive today, tomorrow, and the next day based on a demand plan. You cannot wait for the orders to come in, because if you wait for the orders to come in, it's too late. You will not get round to manufacturing that product. So you need to calculate your safety stocks. And I was very interested in what Stefan had to say in terms of using probabilistic forecasting and good distributions, not assuming everything is Gaussian in terms of forecasting, but also in terms of calculating your safety stock. This is crucial to cover the long tail. So in an FMCG environment, particularly in Europe, although I suspect the rest of the world will move towards the European model here of very short lead times for customer orders, it's essential to use that demand plan and have good demand planning, not just in the long and medium term, but also in the very short term. You have to use that demand plan to decide what you're going to make each day. You cannot wait for orders. The second point I wanted to talk about was really, there is an assumption, and I hear lots of DDMRP proponents talking about the fact that, the apparent fact that it's impossible to forecast at the very granular level. In my experience, this just isn't true. It is possible to forecast at the individual SKU or even SKU customer level more accurately than just using a historic average daily use figure. And what this leads to is a situation where if you use ADU in a very volatile, very promotion-driven environment, you have to lay down safety stocks which cover the totality of the likely future sales in the short term. However, if you adopt a good demand planning process with, as Dr. Sinha said, good demand sensing and good relationships with your customers so that you're getting constant, very short-term feedback as to what's happening in the marketplace, it's perfectly possible to have a forecast accuracy figure which is very significantly below the total variability of the demand from the average daily use figure. So that once you get that, it's now possible to lay down safety stocks which are much more precise than simply using ADU, and therefore you're able to provide higher levels of service from lower levels of inventory. And again, this is hugely important when you've got thousands of SKUs, mostly in an FMCG environment with short shelf life. You cannot play games with holding higher levels of stock to cover this service because you just have huge levels of obsolescence. And the third point I really wanted to make is, how do we bring these things together? So I was very interested in what Dr. Sinha was saying about having a short-term execution forecast and a medium and long-term forecast, which you use for strategic purposes and capacity planning purposes. And this is absolutely correct. They must be integrated. You must integrate all of these demand plans so that your IBP and S&OP process is properly able to fulfill its function. I see many S&OP and IBP processes which really get lost in the mechanics and lost in, oh, we've got to have this meeting and that meeting. And one of the strategies I use to make these processes effective is to bring them back to what I describe as the core purpose. The core purpose of S&OP or IBP is really to ensure that you continue to manage to achieve the business plan. So you have a business plan. What the S&OP and IBP cycle should be doing each time you run through the cycle is saying three things. One, have I done what I said I was going to do up to this point? Or have I deviated from the business plan? And if I've deviated, what am I going to do about it? Because if I do nothing, I'll continue to deviate, and the likelihood I hit the business plan is going to diminish. The second string is to say, what's happening now? Am I doing today what I anticipated I was going to do as close as last week or last month? What's changing? And identifying those changes very quickly. And then finally, I need to be looking forward and saying, okay, with the very latest assumptions, with the very latest forecast and demand plan inputs, am I still going to deliver the business plan at the end of the financial year or beyond? If I'm not, then what am I going to do about it? I have to change something. Things will not change of their own volition. In order to make this process happen, it's absolutely crucial that your demand plans, short-term, medium-term, and long-term, are integrated. So your short-term plan is part of your medium-term plan, which is part of your long-term plan. And if you make all of those things happen, then in my experience, you can have a very effective S&OP and IBP process, focusing on that core purpose which I described. I hope that's interesting and useful for everybody. And
Steve,
we'll go
that
back
has been in addition to what Dr. Sinha said. I will move a bit to Stephen, as Stephen is in the panelists. I'll just use this opportunity to throw him another question. You have been a very strong balancing force between DDMRP, S&OP, and IBP. You know, what do you think should be a good planning approach be? It was just one question to you from my side, then the audience will ask you some questions.
Okay. I mean, I don't want people to get this wrong. I'm a
Stephen.
Sorry.
This is for Stephen.
Oh, for Stefan. Sorry, not Stephen. I apologize.
Our names are too similar. Yeah, so that's a pretty wide question, but in general, I think I agree wholeheartedly with Steve's position on this. You know, there's a role for each. I do disagree. S&OP and IBP are not the same thing. They have a very different purpose. The purpose of S&OP being resolving conflict and staying true to your tactical level plan, whereas IBP is all about driving strategic direction all the way through tactical down to operational. So different purpose and usually a broader mandate and a wider applicability within the organization. But that's, you know, that's just an opinion. I don't think that's a settled matter. Yeah, I think DDMRP has potential, and I think you know, there's a lot of industries where it will work great, and there's industries such as fast-moving goods in the UK, in Europe in general, where it needs more help. And then there's the gray area in the middle where you'll actually have maybe a big chunk of the portfolio that will fit right in, and then you have the corner cases that again need a little bit more help. And it just requires us to keep an open mind. I think that's the most important thing. DDMRP to me is a tool in a toolbox, and you know, you don't do your plumbing with a hammer and a saw. You use the right tool for the job that you need to get done, and sometimes that means you have to mix and match. And so, but I think that doesn't invalidate the proposition of DDMRP in general at all.
All right, Stephen, I'll come back to some more basics later in the question answer session. We have with us Manish Shakalya, Zimmer Biomet. Manish is a strong believer of IBP. He has really lived IBP in Mondelez and now is with Zimmer Biomet. So we will have his perspective on IBP now.
Thank you, Doctor. And you know, let me start with something. When you're nearly the last speaker in any forum, there is a bad part and there is a good part. So as an exception, let me talk the bad part first. The bad part is that all that you plan to speak has been spoken by someone else, right? So you don't want to repeat because that's the worst that you can do to the people who are still there trying to get something new out of the last speaker. That's the bad part. The good part is that you can adapt and you can think of something else because you probably want to then bring in a perspective which hasn't been spoken about till now. So let me try the good part now and let me see if I have been able to adapt to the whole situation and not repeat what has been already spoken about. So, and what interesting way than to talk about 3 roles that I have done over the last 10, 11 years and across 2 different industries. So if I were to say I did my first planning role after 10 years of logistics and execution. So I was always in logistics before I took on planning for the first time in my career, 10 years after my career started. And I took it up for a company called Cadbury, a British company, which then became an American company and became Kraft Foods. And to what Dr. Rakesh was saying, we were extremely proud of driving a 3-month focused S&OP process because our fulfillment, as Dr. Rakesh said, was bang on. We always ensure that we are not just delivering the month plan that we said we will live up to, but we were ensuring that there are no stockouts in the entire 30-odd distribution centers across the country in India, and we were able to ensure that nobody is stocked out and nobody is overstocked. So we were never delivering to 100 ton of chocolate as a plan, but we were ensuring there is an inventory level which is replenished rather than the 100 ton. So brilliant to that point, and we were extremely proud of it. And that was 2008 to 2010. And the company kept on growing and did some great stuff. But what we completely missed out is when you're so focused on a 3-month planning and are extremely proud of doing those short-term solutions and making sure nobody is stocked out and nobody is overstocked, you just completely miss that something much bigger was about to come and hit you, and that is what we say, the capacity, right? And if your chocolates sell very well or if your biscuits sell very well, suddenly all the consumers over a period of time make you a big leader, and your plants will probably have no more of that capacity. So the same company, Cadbury, which was extremely proud of a short-term focused S&OP process, took on the mantle of getting into integrated business planning. And that is when I actually rejoined the company. And I left Cadbury, but I rejoined Mondelez after 3 years to take on the mandate of driving integrated business planning in Asia Pacific region. And to what Stefan said, it's the mandate. It's the planning's mandate which is critical. If your mandate is ensure there is nobody stocked out or ensure there is no overstocking, you will be focused on a short-term S&OP. If your mandate is that you want to really drive different parts of an organization and truly integrate the business, you will not just focus on that part, but you will go into the product, the supply, and most importantly, the financial element of everything that we do in a business to deliver the top line and the bottom line. So if the mandate changes, planning changes. So planning is no more the planning that you did earlier because the mandate has changed. And that is the beauty of integrated business planning. I won't go into the details of it because I guess all of us are pretty aware. But those were the two experiences. And about 9 months back, when I took on the challenge of driving IBP for Asia Pacific in a business, so which is, for lack of a better word, completely divergent from the chocolates and the biscuits to a medical device company, and that to an orthopedic implant, which goes into a hip or a knee or a shoulder or a back, it's cervical, a completely dramatically different business. A business which probably did not worry so much about delivering the short term, but which for the mandate was integrate the entire business in its true sense. So let me give a perspective of why the mandate was there and how that can be delivered through IBP. The product side of the business in a typical medical device company like ours is completely global in nature. So the innovation is what is global in nature because you're running clinical studies, you're making sure that for a Japan or an Australia, you're building products, but building them centrally. So completely global product management. The demand signals are, for lack of a better word, completely local, because you build some of the best products, but if the surgeons are not trained well enough to deliver that product into a patient's body, then probably those products will have less value and some of the products will have more value. So demand signals are completely local in nature. And supply is, again, much like product, completely global in nature, because you would only want to maintain the highest quality standards in very less number of factories globally, rather than have a distributed manufacturing, which an FMCG will probably go for, and a very local for local supply chain. So extremely global product and demand, product and supply, and an extremely local demand. Now, voila, where does the region sit? You've got the global, you've got the local, but it is the region which is trying to drive the management business review and making sure that a market like Japan, as well as in India, can deliver the right value for the products which have been made by the global organization and produced by the global supply organization. And that is where integration becomes the biggest element and the biggest mandate for a company like Zimmer Biomet. And it is not so much to drive the short term at all, but it is completely to drive and bring the strategic plan to life. And let me give an example of how to bring that strategic plan to life. If a medical device company feels that a certain patient approach of delivering the surgery delivers the best result, it becomes the single biggest strategic lever for that business. So in an IBP process, you will always try and see how we are focusing and delivering on that strategic pillar every month. It is that strategic pillar brought to life on a monthly basis. It's not a strategic plan made once a year and then in a folder in your laptop. It is being brought to life in an IBP process every month, be it product side, demand side, or supply side. So the mandate changes dramatically the moment you get into a company like Zimmer Biomet. So Stefan, thank you so much for making that point and making it easy for me that it's only the mandate which drives what form of planning we would want to do. Maybe the last thing I want to say, and I've worked so closely with Peter and have such amazing regard for a company like Oliver White, both in Mondelez as well as currently in Zimmer, we work with Oliver White to drive our IBP, is the mandate in the 1970s was all about running the four walls of a factory very well. So planning was only about production planning. And people love to deliver only production planning within the four walls in the 1970s. But come 2020 and beyond, the life has evolved from production planning to an integrated business planning. And that makes a big difference because the mandate from organizations have changed over the last 50 years. And as this mandate changes, I am absolutely willing to stick my neck out and say that 10 years from now, maybe my daughter will take up this profession and would not call it integrated business planning. She will call it something else because the mandate would have been probably very different. And who knows, COVID would bring in such a dramatic change in organizations, the consumer behaviors and everything else, that we would probably have a different mandate for planning as a function in the next 10 or 20 years, and therefore a new name for the planning process. Thank you so much. That's what I wanted to share through the 3 roles that I did in different companies over the last 10 years.
Thank you. I only was reading yesterday a note by Laura Serere, and someone met her, and from a food industry rather, and said that we have done amazing work above the line, we are struggling below the line. And I think that's something that really has to be seen from a mandate, and a little disagreement with the opinion that you shared, that a mandate on a larger side should really incorporate the below the line mandate of executing that in a brilliant way. And I think what I'm seeing is that as we move towards these changes across globe, there has been a very strong element of disconnect either on the top or on the bottom. And there are also a quite symbiosis, synchronization and harmonization. I owe this word to her because I was reading and I really liked it, in a brilliant way to create a planning which is essentially strategic plan, as Stefan rightly said about strategic thinking. And I think organizations have to be strategically thinking. And I think over a period of time, as we have been moving, the importance of supply chain and the plan has been dictating the thought processes. And I think the thought processes are dictating the mandate, and mandates are dictating certain tools or approaches, whatever you can call it as. Like we have something called connected planning. So let me call Vinod Mathur. Vinod, are you there? You can come over. I think Vinod and Stefan were supposed to just join for question and answer session, but that you know,
I'm just switching on the video. Yeah, I'm here. I'm just switching on my video.
Yeah. So I think it's a very interesting things that you brought in. And I had a discussion with Stefan sometimes back on a show, and I think he also brought on some brilliant point on connected planning. And the world we are seeing, Manish is so full of this connected planning, probably from 09 who sponsored our morning session on future of demand planning, where we had 27 demand planning heads discussing the future of demand planning. And this is more of an understanding session and learning peer-to-peer group session in the morning. I think it has been interesting. Vinod?
Yes, yeah. I'm here.
Yeah. Vinod, I think I'll get you here before the question answer session only. And as things are coming, you know, for a professor like me, it looks like there's so many jargons coming in. How does one understand them? So I thought I'll get you on connected planning and the importance of connected planning, as you represent Blue Yonder, which has moved from from JDA to Blue Yonder with that particular flavor of connected planning.
Yeah. Definitely. I think, as I had also mentioned at the time of closing the earlier topic, the forecast or demand plan is just the start. The whole benefit to the business would come in on how well am I able to use that forecast to position all the rest of my resources in the supply chain and optimize all the other aspects of my supply chain in that sense. So connected, and that definitely has to be in there. I mean, otherwise forecast on its own, yes, even if I achieve a 95% accuracy or a 99% hypothetically, but if my production team is still going to produce something which is what they think is required, or the procurement team is going to go and buy based on historical averages, if they start forecasting on their own, then we are really not translating that benefit of getting a good handle on the demand into the rest of my supply chain. So it's very essential to connect all of this. And the other aspect also, I think what was being discussed around the probabilistic forecasting, right? So that was the other a good outcome of an ML-based approach. And to connect it to my safety stock planning. So what we have also done is, what we have done is to kind of use this probabilistic probability distribution to kind of simulate, especially, and that we found it to be relevant in a fresh kind of an industry where wastage comes at a very high cost. So the algorithm itself then helps kind of simulate that if this is my probability distribution, what should my ideal inventory be if I know my ordering costs, if I know my inventory cost, if I know my wastage cost. So these are some ways in which we can leverage a lot of work which has been done on the demand side, whether it is pure optimization or kind of simulating a probability distribution. So all the improvements on the demand side, we have to find ways to kind of improve the rest of my supply chain processes.
All right, so I think let me go ahead and ask another question to everybody. We have been hearing as people from outside that the biggest challenge today is to create digital twin in your supply chain frameworks and planning to become more resilient and more planning oriented. So how does one go about it, and how does one see marrying technology to planning? Because one of the biggest challenges of the APS system of the past has been that there has been so much of disconnect between the business and the technology. So how does autonomous planning, control tower, and all the good element of these kind of plannings will emerge in future? Because I think if you see the literature, it's very confusing everywhere, where people are saying that technology has to be leveraged more critically in the process of building resilience. So I'll first go to Stefan on this and then to the others.
So yeah, I don't know if I have anything additional to say that hasn't been said already. To Manish's earlier point, when you're in the back end. So I'll give my vote to someone else on this question.
All right. So who would like to take this?
Can I give a slight perspective, perhaps a slightly different perspective on this? Technology is absolutely important here, and as we get more diverse and as we see more proliferation of SKUs, technology really is vastly important. But there's one piece of very simple technology that, in my experience, we forget at our peril. It's called a telephone, and you pick it up and you talk to your customers, because the customers know what's happening. And by carrying out that simple action time and again, you can gain massive strides that would take really huge amounts of technology to do. One of the things I find businesses do get lost in this sphere is they become what I call internally focused. But very recently, I was involved with a very complex, very thorough IBP implementation for a very successful company. And one of the downsides I saw was that they became very internally focused. Their internal processes were fantastic, but they were letting down their customers because they'd forgotten that actually what all of these processes are about is the customer. So yeah, let's not forget some of the simple technologies as well as the more complex ones.
Yeah, and Steve, I want to just chime in here, Doctor, because this is a live example of what actually Zimmer did during the pandemic. And obviously, as all would know, most of Zimmer revenue would come from elective surgery. So if you've got 100 beds in a hospital, you would probably need an elective surgery and book a bed to make sure that the surgery happens. Now, if all the hospitals across most of the world were focused to take COVID patients during a certain period of time, you're essentially blocking out the demand altogether, because there isn't a capacity in a hospital to conduct a surgery, right? That was for nearly 30 to 40 days in every country's COVID graph, if I might say. So initially, literally every bed got blocked out. And over a period of time, as countries realized and unlocked more, the beds got released, and obviously we could do more business. But that was the early time. Sometime in May, June, as we started to look back a little, one of the things that Zimmer as a company did was to call up the surgeons, because at the end of the day, in a business like ours, it's the surgeon who treats a patient. And the history of a patient isn't sudden, except if it's an accident case, which is typically 5 to 10% of our business, or for that matter, any orthopedic implant business, not more than 10%. 90% is degeneration of a knee or a shoulder or a hip over time. Either you're too athletic or you're too old, right? One of them. And as that happens, we actually call the surgeon and say, as you look at your pipeline of patients, are you looking at patients who do not want to come to you anymore, even though they have the pain, because they just are worried about entering a hospital? Or are more number of patients in your pipeline saying, no, we want to come back the moment the hospital is open again? So we would get that nugget of information, which isn't going to come out of any tool, but the tool that you said, Steve. Pick up the phone and call up. And we were calling up the surgeons, obviously a sample of surgeons across different countries in the world, so that we get a sense of what's really happening. And who knows it better than the surgeon, because they are in touch with the patient way before the actual surgery is performed and a company product gets used. So thank you so much, Steve, for saying that, because that's exactly what Zimmer did during that pandemic period. So, yeah.
Yeah, Dr. Sinha, any take on that?
Yeah. So I think we should use technology wherever it adds definite value, not just for the sake of using technology. So if you want to build an agile and resilient supply chain, there are three things which are extremely important. The first one is an agile demand sensing. So if some technology can help you in sensing the demand better, definitely that would add value. The second part of an agile supply chain is the entire responsiveness of the supply of the entire extended supply chain. So responsiveness at vendor end, at your manufacturing lines, in your distribution, how responsive are each of these legs? So if any technology can make them more responsive, for example, robotics could use the responsiveness on certain lines in the factory. The third part is the flexibility of the organization. If by using technology you can make the backend much more flexible, whether it's again in procurement or in manufacturing or distribution, then definitely go and use it. So I would put a filter on these three. Is the technology helping me becoming more flexible, more responsive, or is it helping me in better demand sensing? So these three are critical for making a supply chain more agile and responsive. Yeah.
Vinod, you come from technology, so.
Yeah. And definitely, I mean, as part of our not just the initial business case preparation, but also as part of implementation, there's one critical element that we always focus on is the value part of it. That what is the value that technology implementation is going to bring, right from the initial, I mean, if I have to say the initial sales cycle to the actual deployment of the technology, and even continuous monitoring. That is that technology really giving me the benefit that I originally intended? Right, so that value conversation has to be at the center of it. We do see sometimes businesses reach out to us saying, we want to do something with machine learning. We want to do something with AI. And then we have to really coach and guide them to say, okay, we are not doing AI or ML just for the sake of doing something in machine learning, right, with machine learning. There has to be a business problem that we are trying to solve. And yes, if ML is the answer to that, we use ML. If it's optimization, we use optimization. If it's just like MRP, right? I mean, if it's just a bomb explosion that needs to be done, we just have to do bomb explosion. There is nothing to be optimized or machines to learn something there. So we have to really focus on the outcome, that what is the business value that the customer or that the business is missing today, and what part or what type of technologies can really help get that value. Then everything else kind of flows. Otherwise, it becomes a struggle, right? That there's somebody who wants to bring a new technology, and the users on the ground don't know why are they why are they supposed to use that technology, because nothing seems to be a problem in their view.
All right, thank you, Vinod. We have few questions, but large number of this question by Jyoti Nag and Srinivasan Planani and Iswar, all of them are on how do we capture demand signals and what is the best way to capture demand signals. So anyone can take it. Stefan, this.
Well, I'm pretty experienced in using the demand signal once it's been captured. But unfortunately, again, this is probably a question that's not best for me, because I depend on other systems to actually provide me with that data. And so maybe one of the other speakers has experience in that area. But I know
best demand signal. What would be in your opinion? I know you may not be capturing them, you may be using them, but what do you think should demand signal be?
So ideally, you want to capture your demand signal as far downstream as you can, right? That's the demand sensing part, which could be just one echelon beyond where you're forecasting. That's a good start. But ultimately, you could take it all the way downstream to the cash register scans of the consumer in the supermarket. The problem is the capturing of that, right? And not every industry does that. If you're dealing like Manish, you're dealing with doctors, well, you probably do have no other way than to pick up the phone to sense demand. It's the old-fashioned way of sensing demand. But at least your numbers aren't as big as if you were trying to reach every single end consumer. But ultimately, your goal in all of this is to get information sooner and reduce the bullwhip. And to circle back to DDMRP, its purpose is basically to remove the bullwhip within the four walls of your organization. And what demand sensing does, what capturing that data further downstream does, is it removes the bullwhip or a portion of that bullwhip before it even gets to your organization. So, I greatly value that, but the actual process of capturing it, I leave to others.
Dr. Sinha, I think.
Sorry,
I'll come back to you. I'll come back to you. Let me go back to Dr. Sinha. He has been, using Boogie and DDMRP in a big way. They've been a very successful organization on implementing theory of constraints, and I think they have been using demand signals in a big way to improve planning processes. So what has been the process of capturing this data?
So the best signals are captured closest to the consumer. But I agree with Stefan that capturing the demand signal at consumer level may not be always possible or feasible. But what's actually doable is capture the manifestation of this demand signal. The demand signal will manifest itself in terms of a consumer going out to the retail shelf and buying something. If you are able to capture that, then you are capturing the manifestation of all the demand signals. And if you are able to do that, you can run your supply chain if you are able to capture it at a granular level and on a daily basis. if it's not possible to capture straight from the retailer, you move one step back. But our idea should be to basically the retailer orders on the distributors. But our idea should be to keep getting closer and closer to the consumer as much as we can, and capture the manifestation of demand in terms of consumer purchases. So that works better. That works quite good as a surrogate of the actual demand signal. And that's what we have been doing in Godrej. Yeah.
Steve, what according to you should be the way to capture?
I was just going to say that there's certainly in Europe, in FMCG, the availability, as Stefan said, of EPOS data is growing, so that you can actually circumvent the order process from the retailer themselves. And usually they will want to sell it to you. Sadly, they don't give it away, but you can gain access to what's actually happening at their tills. And from that, you can, as Stefan said, cut off the bullwhip, because even the retailer's ordering processes are not perfect, and they are subject to the bullwhip effect. So by going past them and actually seeing what's happening in the stores, what the real customers ourselves are buying in those retail outlets, we can flatten a great deal of that bullwhip. As I say, sadly, it would appear the retailers want to view that information as an asset and sell it to you, but it is there to buy, certainly in Europe. I don't know about the rest of the world.
All right. From a technology perspective, Vinod, what view do you have?
Yeah,
the idea is to use this technology to capture signals.
Yeah. So there are, from a technology perspective, there are now a lot of applications also available. I know a startup here in India, for example, they have developed a mobile app for the last mile salesperson, right, who actually goes to even the mom and pop stores to kind of punch in the orders. And I mean, it is still not capturing the actual sale that has happened from a store which does not have any major IT infra in there, right? So, but at least capturing that last level, and as the other panelists also have said, capturing that as close to the consumer as possible. Technology has really helped us now with that kind of those possibilities. Just also wanted to bring the context of a B2B. Like when we talk about demand planning, our focus normally usually gravitates towards CPG and consumer-oriented industries. But even as you come upstream, if you are a B2B manufacturer, what we have seen many businesses miss out is capturing the real consumer or real customer demand. In the sense, there are many instances where the sales team would actually wait. They will check if I have inventory, then I will punch in the order. So right, it kind of then starts distorting of what actually my demand was. I'm actually putting in the demand which I was able to service. So even if the customer asks me for a certain date, I don't capture the date anywhere. I don't even enter the demand till I am sure that I'm able to service. So there are many of these process issues because they don't want to show like a bad metric on the fill rate. There is a lot of hesitation to actually capture the right numbers. So that also has to be addressed from not just a technology point of view, but also from the way the teams are measured and the way the process is around that. So that they should not really get so penalized that they start kind of like distorting the whole data itself, because I don't want to show myself in a bad light. I don't even capture sometimes a lot of orders are not even there in the system because I know I can't meet them.
That's a good perspective. I think Steve, there is a question for you. You made some mention earlier about understanding the extent of variability in two approaches, DDMRP and non-DDMRP, or S&OP, this thing. There's a question which says that how do you actually measure the variability, and what is the basis for this statement that demand-based variability is better than sales order variability?
Okay, a good question. I mean, yes, it's measuring forecast accuracy or variability from forecast is one of the critical parts in terms of planning and in terms of defining safety stock. The key is to know the point at which your forecast becomes committed in terms of I have to manufacture or I have to order raw materials. And the forecast at that point is the one which you need to compare with actuals when they eventually come in. Too often you see, oh, well, we're comparing last week's forecast or last month's forecast. The real critical point is where that forecast becomes a commitment. As I say, maybe when do you have to decide what to manufacture? More commonly, it's where do you have to decide what materials or packaging to buy? And you then compare that with the actuals that you get eventually at that point in time for that SKU and compare one with the other. In my experience, when you do that and you do it well, the total variability is reduced, particularly in a promotional environment, because in a promotional environment, the swing in sales that you can see is much greater than you get in a simply random, mostly, shall we say, flat environment. So as an extreme, the worst case of this I've seen was selling something called tortilla chips during the World Cup. In the UK, in England, the demand for tortilla chips in the week prior to a World Cup football match where England were appearing could go up by 4,000 times over normal. Now, if you've got to cover that just by trying to cover total variability of sales, that's huge in terms of safety stock. And the only way you can do it effectively is to try to forecast what's going to happen. So that's a case where one of your demand sensing signals is actually, how are England doing in the World Cup? But if you do it well, it does lead to a reduction in the total amount of variability that you have to cover.
Yeah, and I would add, I think an important point that people always say that forecasts are always wrong. And if you have a case like that where your demand is 4,000 times the normal level, my hunch, not knowing the data, is that sometimes it's 1,000, sometimes it's 5,000 or 6,000. And even if you predicted 4,000, you're going to be wrong, but you're going to be a lot closer, a lot less wrong than if you hadn't done it. And I think that's the key part, I think, in the discussion, especially when it relates to DDMRP, that yes, the forecast is wrong, but it's better than not doing it. Like much better in cases like this.
I think you, Stefan, I'm going to ask you to explain this to us. What is, I'm borrowing from Manish and your articles too. What is good and not so good? I'm not going to use the last word which you had used, but I'm going to stick to what Manish has said. Good and not so good maths, which goes into planning short-term supply chain synchronization, maybe PUGI or DDMRP. You have a view, so we wanted that view to come out.
So yeah, I mentioned that at the Prism series episode, but the good part is the methodology. It's really easy to understand. It's really easy to get an organization all aligned in the same way, which for a lot of organizations is really a big problem. And it is part of a holistic approach. So those are the two good things. So you know that if you're doing step one, that there is a step 2, 3, all the way to allow you to really get to a complete picture. The not so good, to keep your phrase, is the math and some of the limitations. I think the DDMRP followers are a little myopic in that they they hit gold in this approach that works for the mainstream, and they say, look, this is such a beautiful, elegant concept. Now I'm going to apply it to everything. And you simply can't do that, right? It is great, but it is great when applied right where it actually fits best. And as long as you you need to make sure that you look a little wider and say, hey, if this is not a perfect fit here, what can I do to supplement? And that's the not so good. But as I think we'll get there, and I think the demand-driven world will get there. Not everyone has bought into it yet, but ultimately, we're going to find a nice hybrid model that's built around that at its core.
Manish, I've got a question for you, but I'll just wait for 2 minutes. Let me take this debate further. Let me go back to Dr. Sinha. Sir, what are your views on average daily use as an input? You have been talking about it and also making a lot of exception to it with the theory of constraints. So what are your views on average daily use as an input, as a signal input, or even input to buffer and decouple?
Yeah, so ADU is a very, very, I would say, rough approximation, and it has a lot of limitations. The more you use ADU, the more you have to live with those limitations. It was possibly devised at a time when we didn't have more accurate near-term forecasting for the next 3 days, 5 days, 7 days. So if ADU, if the last mile buffer has to buffer for the next 7 days of forward consumption, the way it's done typically in DDMRP is ADU into replenishment lead time into a variability factor. The better way, much better way, is to do away with ADU and look at the near-term forecast using AI and ML to see what is the pattern in demand over the last few days. So it will take into account the demand as of yesterday and then predict, or rather try to predict, over the next 5 to 7 days. So the working of buffers based on near-term forecasting, or what I call as agile forecasting, using AI ML at the most granular level, is a much better way of setting the last mile buffers compared to ADU. So I'm not a big fan of ADU. At one point in time, about 20 years back, 16 years back, I was a fan of ADU because I didn't have access to this AI ML based granular forecasting. So we did implement ADU based buffering in 2004. But now things have changed, and there are much better ways of estimating and setting the buffers based on the AI ML based near-term demand forecasting at a granular level. So I'm no longer, I won't. Yeah.
Let me take a debate a little further, and I think we have with us Steve. Steve is a strong proponent of safety stock against ADU, as far as I understand your writings, Steve. And what are your views on that? And what do you think about ADU, and what should be the alteration to ADU to use in FMCG? Because even Dr. Sinha comes from a FMCG background, 20, 30 years in FMCG, he just moved out and started his own reflexive supply chain solution.
I think I completely agree with Dr. Sinha that ADU is a starting point, but as you get more sophisticated, I would advocate very much that you do as I described previously. You measure your forecast and you measure your deviation from forecast, and you use that to calculate your safety stocks. One of the key things about safety stocks, and this is really one of the reasons why DDMRP is so successful and should be successful, is that most traditional MRP systems are completely incapable of using safety stock properly. They never allow you to consume your safety stock, in which case your safety stock becomes pointless because the MRP system is constantly trying to correct you and not allowing you to consume your safety stock. Your planning algorithm or your MRP algorithm has to be structured such that it allows consumption of the safety stock when it should be consumed. If you do that and you have well-structured safety stocks and an algorithm that consumes it, then safety stock is a real benefit in terms of smoothing the bullwhip and in terms of driving high levels of service. And this is where I think DDMRP, as Stefan said, needs to keep advancing. DDMRP has some great concepts, fantastic concepts in terms of decoupling and putting buffers into the inbound supply chain. What needs to happen is that now they take some of these more advanced concepts. I think what holds them back, some of the proponents, not all of DDMRP, have this absolute block against using forecast or demand plan. And if we can get rid of that and come up with a hybrid that uses both good, well-structured demand planning and some of the great concepts of DDMRP, then we have something that really does make a massive change across all industries.
I think the change is happening. They are tied up with SAP for DDMRP, S&OP, and adaptive enterprises, and all those changes happening. Even there is a lot of thinking amidst them to see that this heavy criticism of ADU is tackled in a different way. I think we had a lovely discussion. One last question to Manish, which is lying with me for some time. A question was to Peter and Manish both, and Peter is not there, so Manish, you need to take it. How do you marry your ITP to IBP? And what are the critical connections that you see between the two? Because I think Peter made a statement on ITP and IBP.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I must say that both are extremely critical, and they tie up what we call the above the line and the below the line execution, because you can't just focus and get the above the line right, because you have to get strategic plan to life, but you can't forget the nuts and bolts, which is the tactical planning part of it. So one brilliant way to marry, or rather I would say two things that we do is the same team which is focused on a demand planning on a monthly basis and therefore running the IBP for the management is also the team which for the remaining 3 weeks run what we call the tactical piece of it. So you're not sitting idle in the next 3 weeks while you are getting into the next cycle. Instead, what internally we call in Zimmer the process as demand plan change process, and we say we signed up for a demand and we got it all aligned, but in the near horizon, every week as a cadence with marketing, sales, and the operations team or the demand planning team, we would come together and say, has anything changed because of which there are certain elements that need to be changed so that the execution and the tactical planning in the short term doesn't hurt itself. So in a way, you're meeting every week, but the tactical planning team is not calling the management and not getting those decisions at a monthly level, whereas trying to take service and inventory balancing decisions on a weekly basis. So focus on service and inventory through tactical planning on a weekly basis, and focus through the fundamental gap or bringing strategy to life in the monthly process. And therefore, I see cadence of driving that on a weekly basis as very, very critical. And both need to happen together because they both live on each other in a way.
That's a good way to end, and it answers the next question, so I'm not going to ask that question. And I think we are on time. And I thank Stefan, Vinod for their presentation and also being part of this particular panel discussion to add some variety.